This week at Starbase, I'm back in the saddle for a bit, and I want to give Caden a special shout out for all his hard work as he's officially part of our production team. I also want to give a special shout out to all of our old school subscribers as well as our newcomers for helping us reach 250,000 subs. It's been a fun ride and we're looking forward to 1 million subs in the near future. Meanwhile, as construction continues on Ship 39, Booster 17 meets its demise, demolition continues at Pad 1, and Booster 18 fails during testing at the Massey Outpost. Now, after the last test failure at Massey's and the resulting damage to the test stand and surrounding systems, what kind of delays might result from this failure, and how bad is the damage to the surrounding infrastructure? Well, let's dig into this week's update and take a closer look. Starting off this week with our fabrication updates, on Saturday morning, Ship 39 was lifted off its makeshift perch on the middle work stand in Mega Bay 2 and transferred to an awaiting ring stand. That evening, the Starship's aft section was moved out of Star Factory and brought to the ship Mega Bay. The stacked part of the ship was then lifted over it, attached, then tandem lifted onto the turntable for final stacking of the first Block 3 Starship. By early Wednesday morning, the sections were welded together and the ship was transferred back onto the center work stand. That night, the S-39.1 Block 3 ship test tank was brought back out of Star Factory and rolled into Mega Bay 2 for additional work ahead of its upcoming test campaign. Over at the Rocket Garden, crews spent the first half of the week removing the COPVs and CO2 tanks from the outside of Booster 17 as they continue to scrap the obsolete Superheavy. By Wednesday, they accomplished all they could outside and moved the booster from the Rocket Garden to Mega Bay 1 to complete the scrapping process. And overnight, crews went up in lifts and began cutting the Superheavy's tanks apart just above the common dome. By early Thursday morning, the cut was completed and the rocket's liquid oxygen tank was relocated to the ring yard while the methane tank was lowered to allow workers to continue scrapping. Moving down the road to the ongoing work at the launch complex, at Pad 1, crews continued the process of demolishing much of the old infrastructure. Over the weekend, the stairs and much of the shielding were toppled off of what remained of the old launch mount. On Sunday afternoon, the first of the 6 launch mount legs were knocked over, colliding with the opposite leg on the way down. As the week rolled on, more shielding and pipework were removed from the remaining structure. And late Tuesday night, the landing rail was removed from the portside chopstick while crews continued to cut into the remaining launch mount legs below. On Wednesday, 2 more launch mount legs were toppled as the demolition continued. On Thursday, the end of the port chopstick was cut free and lowered to the ground. Its removal makes the arm comparable in length to what we see on the Pad 2 and Cape Canaveral towers. Meanwhile, back on the ground, several smaller tanks that were part of the Fire-X and detonation suppression system were removed from the tank farm and later seen being driven out of Starbase. Later on that afternoon and just before lunch the next day, the final 2 legs of the Starship Blocks 1 and 2 launch mount were knocked over by excavators. At Sanchez on Monday, some slight movements were seen from the ship quick disconnect arm that was constructed there, indicating that a movement was imminent. At midnight on Wednesday morning, the first piece of the arm was moved onto Highway 4 and began its journey to the launch complex. Once it arrived, it was taken toward Pad 2 to be prepared for installation. And on Friday, a crane was spotted removing the hood from the booster liquid oxygen quick disconnect on the Pad 2 launch mount to apparently allow some additional work inside. That afternoon, SpaceX performed a whole slew of extension and retraction tests on the quick disconnect, likely ensuring whatever work had been done was functioning as intended. Nearby, crews were spotted working on the rigging for the ship quick disconnect arm as they try to ensure that the load is properly balanced for the upcoming lift. Over at the air separator site, the continuous flight auger rig was dismantled, indicating that piling work was completed. Back up the road at the build site, on Monday, the left crane in Mega Bay 2 was seen lifting a stack of counterweights multiple times in an apparent requalification testing of the hardware. The B-18.3 test tank underwent another few rounds of testing at the Massey Outpost on Saturday and Monday as SpaceX continued proving out the design of the Block 3 Superheavy. The booster hold-down arm testing structure was removed from the Pad 2 launch mount on Tuesday, seemingly indicating that SpaceX had completed qualification testing on all of the new clamps. And on Wednesday, both the booster and ship cryoproofing transport stands were moved into their respective bays as SpaceX prepared to transition to the next phase of Block 3 testing. Late that afternoon, the door on Mega Bay 1 was raised and Booster 18 emerged into the Texas sun, fully stacked for the first time. Overnight, the Superheavy was rolled out onto Highway 4 and up the road to the Massey Outpost. Upon arrival, it was taken to the booster cryo station to be connected to the infrastructure there. Meanwhile, the S-39.1 test tank was lifted onto the ship cryo stand in Mega Bay 2 in preparation for its own upcoming rollout. On Thursday, some activity was seen from the Massey's tank farm, possibly indicating testing operations at the site, although nothing was visible on either the booster or test tank. Several hours later, in the early hours of Friday morning, it became very apparent that SpaceX was testing Booster 18 as the rocket's liquid oxygen tank failed, bursting on the far side from our camera. Likely thanks to the new sturdier downcomer in the Block 3 boosters, the rocket remained upright even as the LOX tank was split completely open on one side. Fortunately, it doesn't appear that there was any significant damage to the Massey's testing infrastructure. SpaceX did say on Saturday that they plan to have the next Superheavy stacked before the end of the year, which should put testing for the new booster in line to run concurrently with testing on Ship 39 and still allow for a launch in the first part of next year. Now, switching over to Falcon 9 operations, on Sunday night, the Sentinel-6B mission launched from Space Launch Complex 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base, carrying a radar altimeter satellite for the Copernicus program. Several minutes later, Booster 1097 came roaring back down out of the California sky as it performed a propulsive landing at LZ-4. This mission was a milestone for SpaceX as it was the 500th reflight of a Falcon family booster. On Tuesday evening, the Starlink Group 6-94 mission lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40, carrying another 29 satellites to low Earth orbit. Fairing halves 187 and 218, as well as Booster 1085, were successfully recovered and returned to Port Canaveral for processing. On Thursday, Booster 1080 was rolled out to the pad at Historic Launch Complex 39A in preparation for its 23rd mission. And just hours later, the rocket turned the Florida night into day once again as it blasted off carrying another 29 satellites to orbit for the Starlink Group 6-78 mission before later touching back down at sea on Just Read the Instructions. In other space news, on Monday, Blue Origin was seen performing tests of their portside breakover fixture that's designed to help lay down boosters following their return to Jacqueline. The next morning, Jacqueline was towed back into port by the support ship Harvey Stone carrying the successfully landed New Glenn booster Never Tell Me the Odds following last week's Escapade launch. On Wednesday, the Recovery Remotely Operated Vehicle, or ROV, was detached and the booster's legs were stowed. The first stage rocket was then lifted off Jacqueline's deck and transferred to the breakover fixture on the dock. The rocket was then rotated to a horizontal position and lowered onto the transporter. The first recovered New Glenn first stage then began its journey up the coast back to the Blue Origin's facility, likely to undergo exhaustive inspections and testing to see how it handled the launch and landing. Blue Origin also announced this week that starting with their next launch, they will be debuting upgrades to New Glenn. These upgrades will include higher performing versions of their first and second stage engines, reusable fairings, a better reusable thermal protection system, and updated tank designs. They also unveiled plans for a new Superheavy class variant called the New Glenn 9X4, which will have 2 additional engines on each stage, a larger payload fairing, and be capable of delivering 70 tons to low Earth orbit. CEO Dave Limp also shared footage of a recent hot fire test of one of their new higher performing BE-3U upper stage engines that gives it the highest thrust to weight ratio of any hydrogen engine. The company continued their busy week by sharing video of their new deployable aero brake that is designed to be adapted to multi-launch vehicles and can be opened to assist in atmospheric braking. On Tuesday, Rocket Lab launched their Prometheus Run mission on their HASTE suborbital rocket. The mission launched several payloads which tested missile defense technology. And 2 days later, the company had their 76th overall launch, the Follow My Speed mission, sending a single satellite into orbit for a confidential customer. Firefly Aerospace announced a partnership with Kratos Defense and Security Solutions as part of the Mach-TB 2.0 team. Firefly's Alpha rocket will provide launch capability for hypersonic testing. Lockheed Martin shared their proposal for a Mars sample return mission. Their system relies on flight-proven designs that they say can bring back samples from Mars for a firm fixed-price model under $3 billion. The great Greg Scott took to the Florida skies last week and supplied us with another trove of aerial shots of the Space Coast. We can see the continuing work on the Starship infrastructure at Launch Complex 39A. The new launch mount, which was installed last week, can be seen here, now straddling the flame trench next to the tower with its Stack Me Heart still visible on the side. A little ways down the coast at Space Launch Complex 40, we can see that SpaceX has made good progress on the construction of the site's new Falcon 9 landing zone. It appears that it should be operational in the near future. A little further down the coast, Space Launch Complex 37 is no longer recognizable. Aside from a few commodity tanks, the old Delta IV Heavy pad has been demolished, leaving a blank slate for SpaceX to begin construction on the Starship infrastructure in the coming months. A little inland, SpaceX's Roberts Road facilities are still abuzz with activity. Now, while seemingly not moving as fast as at Starbase, the Gigabay construction continues to see steady progress. The site's third tower crane was being constructed, while steel columns, beams, and walkways are installed by 2 other cranes. On the other side of the complex, assembly of the modules for the next Starship tower is also progressing nicely. The 8th section was being built with the pieces for the 9th laying nearby. Crews have been working on the already assembled sections, installing the stairs and other internal hardware. The ship quick disconnect arm for the tower at 39A was peeking out of the assembly tent, while the chopsticks and carriage for the tower being built nearby were just outside the tent. A little to the south, Blue Origin continues to expand their Cape Canaveral production facilities. At the southern tip of the complex, new ground clearing is underway, though it's not yet clear what will be built there. Just to the north of the ground clearing, work continues on the light industrial and metal fabrication buildings, with doors installed and interior fit-outs underway. A little further north, foundation work is underway for a new small office and communications facility adjacent to the recently constructed maintenance support building. On the north campus, we can see that piling work is underway for the construction of the new hardware integration building next to the new parking garage. At the main factory building, the expansion likely for fairing production is now well into the structural build-out, with much of the steel already in place. Now check out this great overview shot. It shows us several of the Space Coast integration buildings, including ULA's newly renovated Amazon vertical integration facility. This building will be used to prepare the Vulcan rockets that will launch much of Amazon's low Earth orbit satellite internet constellation. Stoke Space continues to make progress at Launch Complex 14. The company is currently aiming for the inaugural launch of their reusable Nova rocket from the pad next year. Similarly, Relativity Space is working to develop their Terran R infrastructure at Launch Complex 16, with clear progress on their integration building and water tower. Like Stoke, the company is also targeting next year for an inaugural launch. And there you have it, another jam-packed space news update brought to you by LabPadre. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already, guys, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. LabPadre out.